you for your time. Today I'm reading a statement to the UN Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues, and this is the 20th session, 2021. So this UN or United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues is a body within the UN system which was created to address the issues of indigenous peoples all over the world. The session began yesterday and it will run all the way to 30th of April 2021. The theme for this year is Peace, Justice and Strong Institutions, the role of indigenous peoples in implementing SDG goal number 16. And this session or this forum is attended by representatives of 193 member states of the UN, the Holy See, State of Palestine, European Union, and observers from NGOs, indigenous peoples organizations, among others. So every day a meeting is happening between 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. New York time. The UN Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues was established in 2000, that is 28th of July, with a mandate to deal with indigenous issues. For those who cannot participate virtually, they can watch the proceedings on UN Web TV. I counted at least 88 side events have been registered from organizations from all over the world. Ours just took place 1 hour ago. Now we look at what statement I was to read. You know, it seems there are so many people reading statements, so we submitted a written copy of this statement. So for the purpose of documenting our work, we will read it nevertheless. This is Geoffrey Grossi. I'm reading the statement now. Today is 20th April 2021. Thank you, Madam Chair. We all know that to achieve the SDGs, we need financial and human resources, among others. According to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the world needs between 5 to 7 trillion US dollars to achieve SDG goals by 2030. Indigenous peoples can play an important role in holding states to account for equitable use of public resources and the misuse of office for those mandated to implement SDG goal number 16. Fundamentally, SDG number 16 has to do with transparency and access to information. Only through the free flow of information and by holding duty bearers to account will we achieve the strong institutions that are necessary for securing peace and justice. Indigenous activists play a key role in gathering the information and calling attention to abuses, as their communities are often the most vulnerable when it comes to violation of human rights. We are all aware that we cannot achieve the SDGs where there is armed conflict, which results in tragic loss of lives, destruction of property, and displacement of whole communities. Indigenous peoples are usually the first to be targeted in conflicts, and this is especially true of indigenous women. But a further casualty of war is information. In particular, MRG is worried that governments have increasingly instrumentalized the internet in order to control the flow of information. For instance, in Ethiopia, the government has repeatedly shut down the internet for long periods of time in whole or parts of the country. This has made it very difficult for human rights monitors to get an accurate picture of the conflict in Tigray region and elsewhere. The repeated quelling of the internet has made it particularly hard for small indigenous communities there to make their voices heard and their situations known. The vital role of information in achieving SDGs extends to the superior traditional knowledge held by indigenous peoples in terms of sustainable management of ecosystems. This is because they depend on natural resources for their livelihoods. Indigenous peoples must be at the forefront when it comes to redressing violations of their rights, driving states to fully implement successive judgments obtained before courts and human rights bodies. The Ogiek and Endrois cases in Kenya are emblematic of a broader pattern in non-compliance of indigenous land rights. Several years later, Kenya has failed to implement rulings recognizing their respective rights to ancestral lands. Failure to implement successive judgments points to weak institutions and erodes trust in the human rights institutions charged with redressing violations. Egregiously, from end of June to mid-August 2020, the Kenyan government evicted hundreds of Ogiek families from their ancestral lands during the COVID-19 pandemic, flouting the African Court judgment. This triggered ethnic clashes with non-indigenous settlers who have illegally settled on Ogiek lands. It underscores how obstacles in access to justice and the delays in providing effective remedies to human rights violations undermines peace, security, and rule of law. Evictions in Kenya during the pandemic extended to 38 Sengwel families who were driven from their homes in Emboput Forest. Other indigenous peoples in the region have similarly faced dispossession, evictions, and violence in the name of conservation, including the Patwa of the Kahuzi-Biega National Park and the Bennett of Mount Elgon in Uganda. For decades, dispossession of indigenous peoples in the name of conservation has been ongoing without redress. This is unfolding despite the Ogiek judgment, which establishes that all state parties to the African Charter have a duty to respect and protect indigenous peoples' land rights. Despite these challenges, indigenous peoples around the world can and are supporting the rule of law and demanding for justice. In line with implementation of SDG or Sustainable Development Goal number 16, indigenous peoples are already using their viable legal and policy platforms at the national, regional, and international levels in search of justice against illegal forced evictions. In terms of conflict resolutions, indigenous peoples have well-established systems of effectively solving conflicts. Finally, it is up to governments to ensure that indigenous peoples have the means to gather, retain, and use the information about their rights to achieve justice. I thank you.